And we're going to talk about 3 general areas during today's conversation. We're going to talk about why runoff pollution is important to communities of faith, and we're going to touch on the 4 topics you see there. We're going to talk about how the District of Columbia can help. We're going to talk about one particular example of a community of faith that's been involved in this issue, Congregation Tifereth Israel. And we're going to begin with Joel Novi, the Director of Interfaith Power and Light, talking about the importance of caring for the earth. Joel, take it away.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Sure can.
Yes. Great, well, it's a pleasure to be here today. My day job is that I direct Interfaith Power and Light, which is working with hundreds of congregations throughout the region on climate and energy issues. But I also have the pleasure of attending Tifereth Israel congregations on many weekends, and am really delighted to be to celebrate and share their experience with their beautiful rain garden today. There are a lot of different ways to think about why we as communities of faith might want to cultivate our grounds mindfully and think about what we do outside the building on the property that surrounds our congregational facilities. But one thing that I've been thinking about are the teachings that our congregations share about hospitality. Because I think all of our faith traditions in different ways urge us to be deeply hospitable, radically hospitable in our spaces, in our communities, and in our homes. And you probably, everyone on the call can probably think of examples of the ways that your own community strives to really live that out and be deeply hospitable to the folks who enter your community as guests. In the Jewish tradition, the quintessential example of hospitality is Abraham and Sarah, who in the biblical story of Genesis, where Abraham was sitting in the tent in the heat of the day, and he was not feeling well, but he saw coming up over the hill these 3 strangers, and he got up and ran to greet them and asked them what they might want in terms of food and drink, and he rushed around working with Sarah to prepare it. And Jewish tradition has raised this up as the quintessential example of true hospitality. Both that Abraham didn't wait until they got to the tent, the guests got to the tent and were knocking on the door. He ran proactively to make them welcome, and then he was very attentive to the details of what they might need in terms of getting washed up and food and drink. And actually, we're coming up in the Jewish community on the Passover Seders, which is a meal that also strives to be radically hospitable. At one point during the Seder meal, Jewish families will get up and open the door and say, "Whoever is hungry, come enter and eat." And we're basically inviting anyone who might hear us when we open the door that way to come and join our family at the table. So this is a kind of maybe a different or a new way to think about our grounds, but I want to invite everyone on the call to think about the grounds that surround your congregation. Are there ways to think of them as potential places where you could be even more hospitable to to life, more hospitable to bugs and birds and a lot of other sort of small creatures who support a whole chain of large and plants that support a whole food chain of other creatures. Hospitable to rainwater rather than just having it run off dirty into the waterways. Is there ways that you could capture and gather that rainwater in a kind of open and hospitable way? And that in doing this work, even if some of these projects or some of these ideas are new to your congregation, that you can return to this theme of hospitality, which all of our congregations are really experts at. We're all like really varsity hospitality teams, and think about, really this kind of groundskeeping work is just an extension of our congregation's commitment and mission to engage in deep hospitality. In the Jewish tradition, guests traditionally, after the meal, the guest is supposed to sort of help lead the grace after the meal and to insert a special blessing for their hosts, saying, that may God bless these hosts and everything that is theirs. And my hope for us today, as we learn about these rainscapes measures for our congregational grounds, is that if we really learn and like Abraham, how to run forward to make these changes proactively, to figure out what the ecosystem needs from us in terms of hospitality on our grounds. If we do that, that there will be blessing for us that comes from that project and that work and the fellowship of us working together. So may it be.
Thank you so much, Joelle, for setting the stage for the conversation we're about to have. I'd like to transition now, hand it off to Jim Foster, the president of the Anacostia Watershed Society, who will bring us up to date on our situation here locally, runoff pollution in the waterways surrounding Washington, D.C. Jim?
Great. Thank you all, and good afternoon. Our goal as Anacostia Watershed Society is to make the Anacostia River fishable and swimmable by 2025. And we do that through education, demonstration, and engagement. Next, please. We are a small watershed, small tributary of the Potomac River. Most people, when they think of Anacostia, think of Washington, D.C., but the reality is about 80% of the watershed is in Maryland, and it's truly a Maryland river. The watershed is it can be thought of as a sort of bathtub, and when the shower's spraying, everything ends up going down that drain within that the outside edges of the bathtub. So watershed is really what it says is where the water sheds from ends up at the same place. So our watershed starts up in Sandy Spring, which incidentally has a very spiritual connection to the river, and flows down through much of Montgomery County and through Prince George's County into the district. It's truly the only river that runs through the district, and the district has been working very hard to clean up the river. We need Prince George's to work as hard, and we finally have great leadership there and such. So one of the things that we're trying to do is connect the communities around the river, reconnect the communities around the river to the river. We've done a fabulous job over the last couple generations of separating people from the river. Just a real quick point, the river was a pathway for runaway slaves to get to freedom. They would follow the river up to Sandy Spring, which was a Quaker community, and the people there would take them further north to New York and Canada. So next is on this slide, we're showing the river where it connects to the Potomac, just for your reference, out in front of Reagan National. The river is certainly an urban river. The capital, U.S. Capitol, is in our watershed, and as is the outskirts of the White House and most of the eastern portion of Washington, east of Georgia Avenue, I like to say. So one of the main things that are separating us from success, we try to frame the discussion in terms of the nutrients and bacteria, sediment, toxics, and trash are really the main pollutants. But next slide. Everything really gets carried down in the rainwater that is now become stormwater. Stormwater is really rainwater that's fallen on the ground, but because of all the impervious surfaces, we are concentrating it. And the stormwater really carries all these contaminants into the river and into our waterways. So in Washington, we have combined sewers, and when it rains, they overflow. When people litter, that trash gets picked up in the gutters and carried into the sewers. Anything that happens on the land, the dog poop, the nutrients that you put out on your lawn all end up eventually in the stormwater in the river. But, and then the sediment as well. So, and what is impervious surfaces? Well, the Anacostia watershed is about 25% impervious. And it's surfaces like parking lots, rooftops, buildings, roadways, things of that nature that don't allow the water to soak into the ground, but to be carried away from us and into our local streams. Next slide, please. And what's happening is our streams originally could carry a certain volume of water, but they are really being inundated and their positions being overrun. Here you can see a stream, and you may not notice, but right in front of you is a manhole. That is a sewer line that's crossing the stream, and as we erode that stream, that sewer line becomes exposed and eventually breaks and leaks. Next slide, please. So the stormwater that's concentrated is now causing severe erosion. It's taken down the trees, the stream bank. When we come out in the river and we see sediment in the river, it's typically this fine soil that is being eroded from the streams directly as a result of a high volume and flow. Next slide, please. So here's, some of you may know this, but this was a Jiffy Lube up just north of University of Maryland on Route 1. And this part of Paint Branch was just completely blown out in a bad storm. And so, you know, you may go, well, you know, it's natural for stuff to flow, but we have taken natural out of the equation and put our buildings and our lives up next to the river, and then when the river doesn't behave, we get mad at it. So this was about $1 million fix there to fix that. So if you think, well, it doesn't really impact me, think again, because the business owner here almost lost his business. Next slide. So here's in Montgomery County, here's what we call the Grand Canyon. You can see my guy standing down there at the bottom of it. But again, this is just to kind of give you a sense of scale of the erosion that's coming on us from this. You know, erosion's very natural. We wouldn't have the Grand Canyon without erosion. But we have, like other things, we have caused it to be more severe and caused other problems downstream. Next slide. So here you can see, again, you know, the natural waters on the left side from Paint Branch are still rather clear, and as a matter of fact, still supports some native brook trout and others. But on the right side, you can just see how incredibly choked with silt this water is. And true to form, the Indian Creek above there runs through an industrial area, and it's all impervious surface and hardened. And this is, you can see it right here in this picture, the difference between the two. Next. So what's all this mean? Ultimately, you know, you can't clean up the Chesapeake Bay without, you know, it's like all politics is local. All environmental work needs to be local too. And what we really need to do is we need to get everybody to do a little bit, and we'll get a lot done. So you can't talk about the Chesapeake Bay to people in Pennsylvania. They don't get it. But you can talk about clean local waters, fishing, boating, things of that nature. But it has to be on a local level. And that's where you come in, is how can we do this at your house of worship, your business, your home, your community. And the connections ultimately will end up in where we want to be with the whole Chesapeake Bay, but because we'll have a clean community and clean waterways within our own watersheds. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim. And the next step in the story will be taken by Carla Ellern, landscape architect with the Faith of Israel congregation, who will talk about how we can address these problems. Carla?
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the what we call best practices. So the old school for dealing with all this impervious surface was to pipe it downstream, which causes all that erosion. So nowadays we try and do something, and we call it low impact development. And all these practices, the whole idea is to absorb the water higher up near your, where you live or where you work, and then let the water soak in as much as possible and go on to the next area, and so on and so on. So these are 5 of the practices that we're talking about: planting trees, rain barrels, permeable paving or pervious paving, rain gardens, and bayscapes or conservation landscapes. Next slide, please. So first up are trees, and trees are hugely important. First of all, because they have, you know, huge, tons of leaves that catch the rain as it comes down and spreads out the water. The trees uptake a huge amount of water, and in addition, they provide a covering for all that paving out there, and it cools the water because all that rainwater that falls on those hard surfaces gets incredibly hot, as you know, around here in the summer, and then it goes downstream and it actually kills a lot of the fish and invertebrates downstream. Next, please. Rain barrels is another great technique, especially if you have an area that you want to water on your land, like if you have a vegetable garden or an area, and you connect it directly to your downspout. And it's an ancient technique that we kind of lost touch with, but now everybody is very interested in doing it again. The downside is they don't hold that much water because there's a huge amount of rain coming off of your roof. So that leads to the next couple of options. Pervious pavers is a great idea that more and more people are doing now. So if you look at that picture, it looks just like regular pavers, but there's extra spaces between the pavers with special gravel that allows the water to go through, and then you've dug down about a foot underneath the pavers, and it works like a dry well or another water storage area. And then the water continues to soak into the ground. Next one. So this shows the kind of work that goes into creating a permeable paver area. This is a driveway in Montgomery County, and you can see they've dug down about a foot. And then the next slide, you can see then added the gravel that is then going to hold all that water, because there's a lot of space in that gravel. A lot of people ask if, you know, a typical gravel parking lot is permeable, and the answer is no, because often that has been built with sand underneath, which does not allow any water to pass through. And here's some images of permeable paving. It looks just like regular brick, different stones. These are concrete pavers. Okay, next up, please. Another option, another technique that we can use to hold water upstream on our properties is rain gardens. And a rain garden is really a shallow bowl that is designed to hold the water a little bit, and it filters out the pollutants. So it's really cool because it's both a garden, but it's also accomplishing a function for you, for all of us. It's you know, can hold a lot of that oil and grease that comes from your driveway, or it can catch the fertilizers that a lot of people are putting on their lawns, which we don't want you to. And you know, the plants uptake a lot of the water, but it also filters out the sediment that comes through. And here is a picture of a beautiful rain garden in Bethesda, Maryland. And so the whole idea is to hold the water a little bit, allow the water to soak in. And so you can see this one has a berm in front. That lawn is a berm that keeps the water in, and then it overflows over to the lawn. Next one, please. So then another technique that you can use is in DC, we call it bayscaping, and in Montgomery County, we call it conservation landscapes. And it means removing the lawn, because often the lawn around here has been just, you know, put over terrible soils, compacted, you know, often very clay soils that don't absorb any water. And in this case, you're taking up the lawn, or, you know, if you have invasive species, and you're tilling below ground and creating soft, spongy soil, planting it with native plants, or mostly native plants, that can then absorb tons of water. And also, you're creating habitat, which is really important because we've lost so much habitat for you know, birds and butterflies and bees around here. And it's been shown if people just increasing the native plants on their property increases the number of species of birds around, and it increases the number of butterflies and moths. So it's hugely important. So that covers the, oh, and here is a picture of this in DC. So your typical lawn, and just, you know, simply minimizing the amount of lawn is huge, and creating pockets, planting pockets.
Thank you very much, Carla. And now we're going to turn back to spiritual matters for a few moments. And Jody Rose, the Executive Director of Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake, will talk about water in particular as a priority for people of faith. Jody?
Great. Thank you, Stan. So hopefully by now everybody understands that yes, God makes the rain, but we make the runoff. And it is our responsibility to reduce our stormwater footprint. We're going to, we all know in our hearts that this is important. Obviously you've called in, so you feel compelled to learn more about this or dive deeper. So I'm just going to shift gears a little bit into what is some of the spiritual basis for this. I think it's interesting that in Genesis 1, verse 2, so we're talking pretty much the second sentence of the Old Testament, of the very beginning of the Torah, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And what I always find so fascinating about that is that before there was light, there was water. This was God's first relationship, and water as a primary element and essential for all life that came after that, this was essentially the first gift to our being and existence. And it underscores the preparation, that in preparation for his loving relationship with us, there was water first. And moving into the Quran, there's also evidence there that water is a symbol of love, as it says here, and God sends down water from the sky and thereby revives the earth after its death. Surely in this is a sign for people who hear. So next slide. And there are many, beyond sacred texts, I'm sure there's, and actually there are hundreds of sacred texts that refer to water and the importance of water and the life-giving source that water is. There are also teachings in our traditions, and we'll just skim a couple of them here. Obviously, in the Christian tradition, baptism is a very important ritual and a symbol of our covenant with our Creator. In the Jewish tradition, there's Tikkun Olam and mikvah, the ritual bath of purification. In the Muslim tradition, there's the unique role and responsibility of the human to be guardians of God's creation. Buddhism reflects very deeply on the interconnectedness of all life. And in the Sikh tradition, for example, water is the father, earth is the great divine mother. So there are lots of examples throughout all of our sacred traditions on the importance of water. And then in our contemporary interpretation and understanding of our religion, we also look to what are the social justice implications of water degradation. So I'm just going to walk you through a couple things to get you to think about this, just to help you form your own conscience, although I'm sure many of you have thought about these things, but also to maybe help you in your conversations with others at your congregation. Sometimes we find in our churches and our synagogues or temples that our outreach work or our social safety network is operating in silos. For example, we have the soup kitchen work that we do, or we have the literacy work that we do. And we don't have time, or we don't have the capacity or the funding to do the environmental work that's needed to be done. And it's really important to reflect and help others understand the connection that all of these social issues have to one another. And it's somewhat confusing to go and work in the food pantry, but then not address some of the water degradation that is directly impacting fish, which are no longer fit for consumption. So we'll talk about that. So here's an example. So often we are able to go to our pool, our local neighborhood pool, or maybe some of us have pools in the backyard to cool down, and yet the poor in our midst are drawn to our natural resources and streams to cool down or to reflect, connect with water and nature, and and those are not always fit for wading in. In fact, there's a phrase that recently I heard, and it's interesting, something about how the Chesapeake Bay is the largest gated community in the country, and that's really true and something we should all think about. What does that mean for us as people who influence that? Next slide. And here we can see the, the difference between being able to shop the perimeter of the store, as you may have been familiar. You know, the perimeter of the store is where the fresh fruit and vegetables, the fresh fish and meats are available. And some who are confined to shopping in the center of the store, and then they supplement their diet with food from our natural rivers and streams. And while we think this doesn't happen, it does. There was a study that was done about 3 or so years ago that found that roughly 17,000 people consume fish from the Anacostia River every year, and they're doing that to supplement their diet. So it causes us to think about, you know, the Wendell Berry quote that maybe you've heard me say before, and he's a wonderful poet and author. You should read up on him. Do unto those downstream as you'd have those upstream do unto you. Next slide. And here's another example. Jim was talking about the erosion and the major issues that happen, and this happens, you know, quite frequently in our urban centers. You know, on the left we see a storm drain that works properly. In our urban centers, the underground systems are in such state of disrepair. There's infiltration and inflow, and we struggle with a lot of flooding in urban centers, and those really are a huge setback to the citizens and businesses there. And that image there is from Baltimore with the sinkhole that happened a couple years ago as a result of major flooding. Next slide. So we have to really reflect on how the environmental stresses that we're all a part of, we all make this one up, do impact the poor first and foremost. And what does that mean for us? Obviously, it's also important to reduce the impact on our rivers and our streams, as Jim was saying. So there's many prongs to this. There's a great book you might want to read by Christina Papard called Just Water. And a quote from there that I think we should all think about is, what people do and who they become is shaped by where and how they have access to fresh, clean water. It's really a powerful quote that you could spend a lot of time praying about and thinking about. What are we as individuals called to do to address that? Next slide. And so to move along a little bit more quickly, I think maybe I want to give enough time for the DC representative to speak. So there's just 2 essays here. You might look these up. They're really wonderful. And in particular, the one by Jim Wallace, I'll just read a quote. You know, we can be overwhelmed by all of this work that needs to be done, but the power of the faith community is that it is our job as people of faith to be hopeful. He says, hope is the particular thing the people of God need to provide and is the most important thing that every movement for change needs. And that's precisely what we can be doing on our grounds by demonstrating these projects. Go ahead, next slide. By demonstrating these projects, oops, back one, and teaching others about it and learning about it ourselves. So faithful advocates for water will deeply care for creation as a reflection of their love, not only for their creator, but for those around us and those downstream of us. Model good behavior choices in our congregations and spreading that to our neighborhoods, and then bringing to bear this stewardship voice, this faith-based voice on legislative issues. Next slide. So if you want to learn more, please go ahead. We've got a lot of resources and programs and tools and stuff on our website. I do want to draw your attention to one toolkit that will be shared with this PowerPoint, and you can find it on our website. But I want you to take some time with it. It's going to really talk to you a lot about how, once you implement some of these projects on your ground, how do you use that to really build the movement and to bring visibility to this issue, not only within your congregation, but to your surrounding neighborhood. Things like, how do you write a press release to invite the media to come and see your rain garden? Maybe you do a blessing of your rain garden, not only with your congregation, but perhaps you invite your local county council person or somebody from a nearby corporation who you don't think necessarily buys into this, but perhaps they, you know, would be touched a little bit to see the actions that you're taking. And in closing, there's just a great song from, oh, I do want to say one other Wendell Berry quote, which is really fascinating. He says, the question that must be addressed is not how to care for the planet, but how to care for each of the planet's millions of small pieces and parcels of land, each one of which is in some precious way different from all the others. There's an interesting, it's a Christian rock song that I love by Matthew West called Do Something, and in the song he says, God, the world is such a mess, why don't you do something? And the answer is, in the song, it says, I did, I created you. So I just hope that this empowers you and inspires you and gets you to stand up and show your soul and really take some action at your congregation and teach others how to do the same. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jody. Now we're going to turn to Trin Doan from the DC Department of Energy and the Environment, who will talk about how the district makes resources available that can turn some of these hopes into reality on the ground. Trin?
Okay, thank you, Stan. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. So in the next few minutes, I'm just going to talk about a bit about the availability of financial resources here in the district and some of the off-the-shelf programs that congregations or individuals can sign up to help you reduce the stormwater impact. Next slide, thank you. So the data shows that 43% of the district's land area is impervious, and a single 1.2-inch storm falling on this area produces about 525 million gallons of stormwater runoff. And annually in the district, we've calculated that 25 billion gallons of stormwater flows off these impervious surfaces and into the local waterways. So those are just some of the data we're talking about. And then the district realized the impact of that, and as a government agency, we're here at the Watershed Protection Division, we have a few opportunities and initiatives that target the restoration efforts, starting with environmental literacy, getting hands-on learning with the students, river smart programs that focus on reducing sediment and nutrient levels, and then talk about the urban stream restoration and the project that goes into it. Next slide, please. So one of the DC initiatives is promoting environmental literacy through hands-on environmental learning. And I wanted to start talking about this is where we get the inspiration to have sort of like conscious citizens. So the definition of an environmentally literate person is that he or she understands how to take actions that respect, restore, protect, and sustain the health and well-being of human communities and environmental systems. So this is available online where we're asking our school communities, our faith-based communities to understand how our actions impact the environment. Next one. So enters the River Smart Communities program as one of our efforts. We started out with demonstration of best management practices project. Then we merged into a subsidy, an incentive program, so like a rebate. And then we tied it into a project on stormwater utility. So we're talking about rate discounts on the water bill. And then we to enter the ambitious stormwater retention bank credit so that we could get more members to implement these projects. So now we're talking about economic incentives rather than just the environmental and emotional incentives where we want to target these urban sites where we can retrofit. Next slide, please. So I've put together a few key facts about the program. It's really 1, 2, 3. Schedule an audit, and the auditor will help you implement and determine your stormwater retrofit project and recommend the most feasible and cost-effective for the site. And then you can formally apply by calling that number or go to the website. And property owners can apply for a rebate of 60% or more of the project cost for LID practices. And then upon installation, if you're approved for the funding, owners can proceed for installation and rebate is issued upon the final inspection. And just to note that no two project sites are alike, so we evaluate this based on the support behind the applicants, and your vision for innovation for the type of thing that you want the community to see. Next slide, please.
One question, LID practices, what does that mean?
Oh, LID, low impact development.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. So the audit would discuss the land characteristics of your site. So I've put down a few data gathering that an auditor would discuss with you about based on the slope, the existing landscaping, evidence of erosion, annual ponding, the soil type that you have on your site. Another data gathering we would talk about is the building that is on your site. We would note, what the type of building you have, the area of roof drained through each of the downspout, the disconnected or connected part of the downspout, and then the location of utilities and where your spigots are located. So those are the characteristics that we put together and make recommendations of the type of retrofits, the type of low-impact development we would ask for you. So when you do get that written report, you see the emphasis on recommendations and site characteristics. And in our programs, some of the common practices for houses of worship we have done on are bioretention in parking lots, reduction of impervious surface, permeable pavement, and reforestation, which is more emphasizing planting of shade trees on the site. And the overall is to optimize existing green space that you have on. Next slide. So here I've just put together some of the key challenges of any project. The need generally is higher than the budget. Expectations among members and funders are high, so they're looking for things that they want to get out in terms of reporting and in terms of what the property owner wants to see. So we got to look into those two players and then somehow collaborate. This usage can be tough. We're talking about how is the site owners and the inhabitants of that area would use the site. And then the stakeholders are many. So you're talking about congregant members, you're talking about parents, you're talking about maybe council members or whoever's in that area of your neighborhood. So having an action plan is probably beneficial. The maintenance capacity is very low, so we're looking for a team that can maintain the site once it's installed. Funding typically is restricted because the River Smart Communities is restricted to certain funding. So the two slides I have are just something I pull up from the web that says, we could give you guys a tree house unless you can really strongly tell us how it substantially reduced stormwater runoff. So creating a budget plan really helps. So next slide, please. So with that said, it's really, there's no shortage of inspiration. We don't want to restrict anything. We want to put it out there and then we'll discuss with you all. And, there are really innovative designs out there. And we like to, the houses of worship to take some of that initiative and implement that on your site. Next slide. So I would say that there's endless potential. So if you take a look on your site and something that's open fields and type of things like that, if you can understand that we can do better, creating habitats for it would be more beneficial. And one thing that we ask members or applicants to do is practice walking to and entering and gathering in the potential space. And we ask you to consider how members will move through the garden once you have this sort of like blank slate to work with. Next slide. So here's an example of one of the River Smart Communities participants. This one demonstration site is the First Rocks Baptist Church on Alabama Avenue Southeast. It was designed and constructed with high stormwater capture. So we're asking retaining the first 1.2 inch of rainfall on site. And the site itself has some interactive elements, of rock flows, scavenger hunt for native plant species. And we're looking at the educational value, perhaps like signage to install on the site and other things that the communities can learn from. Next slide, please. So in your design, try to incorporate these four characteristics, elements: education, hydrology, biodiversity, and human ecology. These are sort of the place-making as a landscape design principle in how we evaluate your application. And one of the testimonies from our participants is that a teacher said that she saw for the first time like 4 to 7 species of butterflies and then several species of birds coming to her site, just because right after the installation it creates biodiversity habitat on the site, the ecosystem and all that stuff. So it's a really good feeling for our participants to see and connecting with nature. Next slide, please. So there are numerous benefits to creating green infrastructure. Aside the stormwater capture, gardens and best management practice encourage, a slew of good things like cooperative work and leadership, learning through your mistakes, patience, self-esteem, pride, and try to think outside the comfort zone. And it's a really good gateway to environmentally conscious citizens. So we do hope that the communities of faith would tap into these various resources to help implement your green infrastructure project. And I do emphasize patience, because as you work with so many stakeholders in DC government, there are protocols to our process and all that stuff. So being patient and write up an action plan, and we have staff here that will support you every step of the way.
Wow, thank you so much, Trin. Now, after hearing about some of the resources that the district makes available, let's talk about one particular community story, Tifereth Israel Congregation. And we'll turn the microphone back to Carla Allen.
Okay, so yes, Tifereth Israel, just a little background. It's a synagogue with about 300 households, and it's located on 16th Street in DC, Northwest DC. And a few years ago, we received a grant from the district to use the site of the synagogue as a demonstration project. To show all those techniques I talked about before, and to show how these both can be beautiful and can work really well. So we had two goals. The first one was to absorb the water, rainwater coming off the building on our site, and also number two is to educate and inspire the congregants to use these kinds of techniques at home. And we are really grateful to DC for providing the funding to do this demonstration project. Next slide, please. So just to give a brief tour of what we did, we had a very small site to work with, and we created permeable paving in the area that belonged to the synagogue. If you see there's a line, that's the property line between the existing concrete driveway behind on the side of the building, and our demonstration area showing 3 different kinds of permeable paving. The one in the middle is porous concrete, which is like a popcorn kind of concrete, which allows water to go straight through it. And then 2 other kinds of pavers. One is more like a brick, permeable brick, and the other one is a different color concrete paver. So it gives a little demonstration of what you can do. Then we took the water coming off the building in one spot. No, the next slide. Went down a runnel which then overflowed, which you're looking straight at, into an infiltration planter, which is a rain garden, but because it's close to a building, it has basically walls going down into the ground to separate the water from the building. So you can see there's an overflow area. The white piece in the back is if there's too much water, the water can keep going to the next area. So this shows the runnel, which takes the water from the roof and then overflows into the next piece. So we were trying to show the movement of the water in addition to being able to absorb it every step of the way. Next slide. So from there, then the water overflows into bioswale, which is really a series of rain gardens. You can see in the front picture, there's some, in the front of the photo, there's some rocks, and that separates one rain garden area from the next. So the idea is that one area could fill up and then overflow into the next area. And there's even a pipe going underneath the front walk just in case there's too much water, because as Trin said, there's a lot to go through. We got permitted, so we had a lot of approvals to go through, and we had to, show that nobody was going to trip and fall into this rain garden. We had to show that nobody was going to, the water wasn't going to flow and freeze on the sidewalk and things like that. But as you can see, it was installed, and it's all good. So then it was planted full of native plants. This shows the, a variety of plants. There's blue cardinal flower, and then there's the regular cardinal flower, which is the one in red in the front. There's a whole variety of plants. Juncus and Carex pennsylvanica, which is called Pennsylvania sedge in the front. And, I think the community really loves it because they, can see that it's attracted hummingbirds. We've had a lot of bees and wildlife. No deer yet, which is good. So everybody really loves it, and it's inspired a lot of questions. A lot of people have, learned about it. There's a sign around the corner there. Next slide, please. And this is just shows some of the different plants that we incorporated. Hibiscus, monarda, those cardinal flowers that I mentioned, that's the lobelia, and aster on the lower left that shows a bee right there, using it for nectar. So that is, in brief, a tour of the Tifereth Israel Rain Garden Project.
Thank you so much, Carla. We at Tifereth Israel Congregation, our goal wasn't simply to take our shared community space and engage in environmental stewardship, although that in and of itself is obviously a worthy and important goal. We wanted to leverage those investments into educating and inspiring members of the community to see what they can do along similar lines at home and make a further contribution. So we held a number of classes at the synagogue, both before and after completing the work of the rain garden. We were explaining to people what we were doing, why it was important, what a watershed is, and so forth, and describe the kinds of support that's available from the district and from Montgomery County. We were thrilled. Trent came out and spoke at one of our panel discussions. We've had some community events at the rain garden, including our formal unveiling where people came out and dug and put in plants. We have a resources list on our synagogue website, and we send out information and links to the congregation via listservs. That resource list both provides information about the importance of this issue, about concrete, well, not concrete strategies, that's the wrong adjective, about specific strategies that people can do at home or in other community institutions to minimize runoff pollution, and places where people can go for resources to help support those investments. We had a series of articles in our synagogue bulletin describing how members have made green infrastructure developments at home, those LID, low impact development strategies that Trin and Paula were talking about. And the thought was we wanted to show to people that, hey, your fellow members of the community are doing this. You can do this too. And one final piece that we have planned shortly is to engage the religious school in working on the rain garden. Obviously, different kids are different ages, different levels of understanding, but for every single level of understanding, we can both educate about the nature of the challenges that we face, as well as in a very hands-on way, help kids learn about ways that we all working together can help improve our local environment. So with that, in a moment, I'm going to turn it over to you to ask questions. I'm going to unmute everybody's phones. We're a sufficiently small gathering that I think we can handle that respectfully. But I wanted to also let you know that the PowerPoint, which is available as a handout, and which you should be able to see now on your screen as a handout, and which we'll also make available afterwards, has some additional resources that we didn't have time to go over. Contact information for many of the presenters, a sense of what our objectives are, you can see the URL at the bottom, links to the District of Columbia's information about how we can all access resources to help us out. Other local jurisdictions, in case you have members who live across the line, across the district line, the toolkit that was referenced by Jody, and you can see there's both the cover page and the link for you to get that, as well as some biographies for a number of our speakers. So with that, I'm going to unmute people's lines, and please